Choke's on. Oh my God, it's gonna work. Howdy my friends, and welcome to the channel today. I'm Luke, Thunderhead289 here on YouTube. In this video we're going to be doing something way off the beaten path. And so it's been cold, rainy outside, snowing. Haven't been able to do a lot, but warm weather's on the near horizon. And so I've been kind of fooling around and just doing something a little bit different. I've always wanted to try and put a lawnmower carburetor on a V8 engine. With gas prices being ridiculous today, I want to see if this could be actually practical and even possible. So I found the smallest lawnmower carburetor I could find that was still a float bowl style. So, you know, it could work with a typical V8 4-barrel style fuel system. And we're just going to see how it does. I got the Chevy adapter here I made, just, you know, going for full-on absurdity. Now a Ford has the distributor in the front, and I mostly run Ford, so I made this bad boy to clear the distributor on one of those units. But I don't know, you know, I've just kind of done this for self-entertainment, and so far I've been pretty successful in that endeavor. But stay tuned. We're going to see how this thing runs, if it runs, you know. On paper, really, this shouldn't work. But, you know, I'm going to pull out all the tuning stops, all my little tricks and tips in my tuning toolbox to see if we can get this thing to go. And we'll just see what happens. God, this is the stupidest thing I've ever tried to do. I am super entertained to see if this is going to work out. So just running through some of the parts and pieces I designed for this project here. Most of it, you know, being done at 2 a.m. where I got to go to work at 6 a.m. in the morning, but that's just kind of how I do things. But I would encourage folks to, you know, if you want to do any engineering stuff or whatever, to get into doing CAD. We just live in a world where all this stuff is so easily accessible. The one thing I would say is, you know, just use something that's used in industry. There's a lot of free softwares out there, but I designed this stuff in Fusion 360, and, you know, that's an Autodesk product, which is pretty popular in manufacturing. So, you know, it just pays dividends to know. Now we move over here to the 3D software, and I can't take full credit. Jonathan at Quick Covers, OAM, taught me a lot of stuff when I worked with him there, and it's pretty good software here where you can go through and make a lot of process control edits. You know, you can make a lot of mistakes if you don't know what you're doing, but you do have full control, so you can do crazy things like this and get away with it on a machine that you otherwise shouldn't be able to do that. But these are just a couple things that are worth getting into and learning how to do. Now, if you follow my channel for a while, you know that Emily and I came from the trailer park, and these are just some of the skills and abilities that allowed us to, you know, get out of that scenario and move on down the road of life and do some of the things that we've always wanted to do. All right, let's take a look at this 3D printer. It's hanging in here. I've kind of taken over the engine lab with the thing. You know, most folks, they'd probably want to work on something like this, and I'm real close to having the Supercharged Galaxy done with the TKO and whatever. Just yesterday I did the wires. They're cut to length units, and, you know, you're just not a legit hot rodder if you don't do it that way. But, you know, I've done this stuff like 1,000 times over. It's just not super interesting to me at this point. That's kind of how we get into projects like this. So like I said, we've taken over the engine lab. That's a 393 stroker sitting there, a 351 Windsor that's straight from the machine shop. But, you know, once again, and this is how we're spending our time instead of doing that. But this is pretty wild. This is the biggest thing I've ever tried to print on this little tiny printer. We're at 92%, and we're on the 30th hour. Now I've had to pull out all the stops to do this thing. The first time I tried to print it, it's so big, and we're getting so far away from the heated bed that it started to warp. And so I broke out this space heater, and it is legitimately 110 degrees in this room right now, but it's holding up good, no warpage, and we're getting there. We're super close. I'm printing this in PETG or PETG, whatever you want to call it. And I've done this stuff before where I've made different adapters and things, and it holds up really well to fuel. Preferably I'd use PETG carbon, which is right here. It's even more rigid, I guess, and if this looks like a remote idle air control valve, you'd be correct, because that is in fact what it is. That's normally the size of things I print on here, but this is definitely a Mac Daddy. It is almost done. It's got a little tiny nozzle tip on it, so the resolution is just so good. But not that it matters, but I don't know, you know, just for the fun of it, I guess. But we are almost there. We're getting to the point where we can test this thing out. This is definitely one of those don't try this at home moments. I'm by no means a 3D printer wizard, but like a lot of things, I know enough to be pretty darn dangerous and what I have to do to kind of make things work. So yeah, definitely don't run a space heater in a little enclosed room. I'm gonna get the heck out of here. It's like I said, it's 110 degrees, and in Iowa here, I'm used to like 10-degree weather, which we have just on the other side of the window there. And there she is, done. How long did this sucker end up taking? 1 day, 9 hours, and 18 minutes. Finally shut everything down so it's not 110 degrees in here. Turned out with some pretty good resolution. I don't see any notable errors in it, so that's definitely the longest print I've ever tried to do, and I hope I never have to do it again. But we got a good part. We'll break all of our support material off. She'll be good. Oh, look at the poor little guy. Smoked the extruder motor at the very end of the 34-hour print, apparently, because it got done, but when I tried to run it again, that was all she wrote. But luckily, a replacement is only 16 bucks, so she'll be down for another round here in about 15 minutes, and we can finish this bad boy off. Just go to sleep, little buddy. It's all over now. Shh. You did good. You did very good. Alright, so it's 1:45 p.m. in the afternoon, March 19th. The following day, it's nice and sunny out. So now, let's check out what this gasoline did to this Tupperware deal. Really gave it a rough time. Trying to do this with one hand. Maybe I'll move that out of the way. There we go. So the Tupperware had kind of a rough time with the gasoline. As you can see, the PETG is just like when I put it in there. It's not all flimsy, good and stout, not melted, not warped. So, you know, which I knew that'd be the case, but I figured I better prove it to you guys. Come on, hands. Man, that stuff really stings. That must be like 90 million octane. All right, so I'm about to install this thing, and I wanted to go over some preliminary theories of how I think this would work if it does work. So the biggest thing, obviously, this is notably smaller than a 4-barrel. It's like restrictor plate racing on top of restrictor plate racing. But, you know, at first I thought it's going to be way lean, but the thing is really going to be limited on airflow by the carburetor itself. So if I can just match the jetting, which these are needle jets, where basically it has a jet orifice, and then there's a needle that goes into that orifice, and as you pull it out, I guess, that orifice essentially gets larger. And so it's real easy to add or pull fueling on this carburetor, and that's why I picked this one for that. So that's kind of the first thing. The next thing is I think it's going to probably want a ton of ignition timing. Now, if you don't follow my channel and haven't heard me rant about ignition timing, I mean, all things equal, the biggest thing with timing is less cylinder pressure is going to ask for more timing because the particles are farther apart. It takes longer for those particles to all ignite and propagate across the cylinder and burn. That's why, you know, when you get into boost with supercharged cars, you pull timing for boost, and that's why low compression engines run a lot more timing. Now this thing, I guarantee it's going to be making vacuum at like wide open throttle. You know, it's just not going to volumetrically fill the cylinders that well. So it won't necessarily be a lean mixture, but it'll be a less dense cylinder charge that's going to ask for a lot of ignition timing in order to burn that cylinder charge at the right time in the stroke for it to be able to run. So I'm going to hook it up to manifold vacuum, and probably if this thing stays above 12 inches of mercury, it's always going to be pulling advance from vacuum advance. You know, as you open the throttle on any carburetor, you know, your throttle kind of works like a restriction to your engine, which is a glorified air pump with a sparkler in it. You know, as you open that throttle, you're allowing more and more air in, and your cylinder pressure is increasing. And when you get into the throttle really hard, your cylinder pressure goes up, and that's why vacuum advance drops out, because we don't need that much timing to burn the mixture at the right time. So I think that methodology is going to apply to this thing. My final concern is that, you know, the needle and seat assembly was probably for like a gravity feed. Not probably, is for a gravity feed. And so that's going to be interesting with 5 to 10 PSI on the thing. No accelerator pump, but, you know, there's been carbs throughout the years, like a 240 inline 6 F100. It also, the Carter carb on that thing doesn't have an accelerator pump. So you just flip the choke, crank it over, it fires, and you open the choke, and it's running. So that'll probably apply here as well. So anyway, with that, I might as well fire up the Maverick for potentially the last time in case this destroys the engine completely. Such a good running car, you know. Just seems like the wrong thing to do to it, especially when it's been so good to me. Or not. What a minty unit. I have this handy dandy ball valve in here because this is the engine in the car I use to test out rebuilds on other folks' carbs when I get done, oftentimes, just to make sure that everything's clean and working the way it should. So with that closed, the engine's going to run and just run the fuel out of the bowls. Then, you know, we're not dealing with a bunch of stuff, and we're trying to put this guy on. There she goes. All right, we're gonna leave that valve closed. If you're doing this tomfoolery, want to make sure you shut your key off. You definitely don't want to replicate the heater that I used in this car over the winter, the old Coleman stove, you know. Somehow I didn't barbecue myself. Always a good thing. Shooting away over there. All right, off she comes. Little pro tip. If you do what I do, where you put a lot of different carburetors on to test different folks' things, or you take your carburetor on and off a lot because, I don't know, you have like a carburetor fetish or something, If you do take bearing grease and rub down your gaskets beforehand, see how that didn't rip whatsoever when I took this off and it sat all winter? You know, that's a little trick, and then your gaskets are essentially reusable. And a side note, if you've ever struggled with not having enough common vacuum ports, like, you know, where it's not plumbed from one cylinder or biasing to anything, these TransDap carb spacers are super nice. So I'll leave the link below to these, but I use these a lot. And, you know, they're good and insulative to keep the heat off the carb, and you have a nice extra manifold vacuum port. All right, for preliminary testing here, I think I'm going to opt to not run the air filter. Now, naturally the carb studs are too long, so I got some of these nice patented carb stud nut spacers here. And you know what? I probably want to use washers on here, just in case, to distribute the load. So I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give it a lot of throttle right in the beginning. So our mixture screws for low and high speed are pretty far out, so it should be rich, you know. All right, so in theory, it's all bolted on. Very liberal application of the term bolted on, but it's on there. And no time like the present, the moment I've all been waiting for. I'm almost afraid to do it. Here we go. Oh my God, it's trying to idle. Okay. All right, so this is so dumb. It almost sounds like it has a chance, or it could be wishful thinking, or fuel just from the intake from the other carburetor that I just took off. But it's kind of hard to run the throttle from the inside because there's no throttle cable at the moment. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to actually have to try. We're not going to do the shaky hand 1000 like I'm doing right now. We're going to get the tripod, and I'm going to just jump the starter and try and work the throttle and see what happens. We have our under hood key, and then we just flip the choke. In theory, you know, I have these pretty far out, but not all the way out, so it's not just like runaway rich, if it could be rich. But we'll just listen and smell and see what we have and adjust as we need. Okay. Choke's on. Oh my God, it's gonna work. So before we get too buck wild with this thing, since I know this carburetor was normally like a gravity feed or one of those case pulse pump things, whatever, you lawnmower folk know what I'm talking about. Now I'm pretty sure this pump, I haven't had a gauge on it for a while, but if I remember right, it's around 8 PSI. So something tells me I'm gonna have to regulate this down. So I got a little pressure buoy here for pressurizing cooling systems to check for leaks or blown head gaskets. They're a really nice tuning tool for different things, or a test tool rather. And I'm just going to pump it up here slowly but surely. So that's almost 5 psi. That's more than I thought. Okay, so technically the needle and seat is holding 5 psi. And that's about it. You can see as I try and add more, it bleeds back down. So that means I should probably put a regulator on here and get somewhere below 5 psi if I want this to work out. Alright, so I've done a few things. You saw the test where I pressurized the fuel bowl to see what psi it would hold. Now this pump's putting out like 8 psi. That was way too much. So I got a regulator sitting down there, but I just thought, well, we could just use the ball valve to restrict flow. So now we're sitting just below 3 psi. And then I also took the float bowl off, and then I bent the float itself down. And I'll explain that in a little bit here, why that made such a difference. All right, there she is running. You can see our real-time AFR, our vacuum, 20 inches of mercury, idling around 13 or so. I have idle adjustment off. We're not doing any live edits. For our fuel circuit, doesn't do too bad. It's almost annoying how well it runs. Idling at about 700 RPM or so. It's just some classic Thunderhead 289 action. Y'all just had to say I couldn't do it, so here we are. Set it up on the cam, give it a few revs. Sounds like it's a lot quieter than it normally is, which is to be expected. It arguably runs so good, at least idling and revving up and down, that if I didn't tell you there was a lawnmower carb in there, you'd have no idea. That even like exceeded my expectations. Not bad. All right, my friends, I think that proved the point that it will run and it will rev. So now I think I want to get to this point first before I design the throttle bracket. As you see, the throttle on this thing moves side to side, and a typical throttle linkage in a car moves back and forth. So I got to do something to figure that out, but I just want to make sure it ran first, and after a little bit of Thunderhead 289 tuning action, it turned out pretty good. I actually did better than I even thought it really could. Now the biggest thing I had to do to get this to work, and you saw early on in the video, I was checking the pressure to the carb, what it could hold, and we saw that it held around 5 psi, but so I had to regulate below that. But there's also another step to this process. Normally this sees really low pressure, if not like probably gravity fed. And so there's a relationship between your fuel pressure and where your fuel level is going to sit in the bowl. And that's based on basically your float height adjustment. And so I guess to put it in simple terms, think of a boat, okay? The more you load on a boat, the lower it's going to sink in the water. Now we have the same thing going on with the float, where pressure is pushing on the needle, and the fuel, the buoyancy of the float and the fuel is pushing back on it. So, in a boat, when you load more on it, it displaces the water as it sits lower. Well, in a carburetor, it does the same thing, but the water, or the fuel rather, doesn't have anywhere to go. So what it's going to do with more pressure is raise in the float bowl. Now there's a direct relationship between the fuel level and the low pressure area it takes to draw that fuel out of the float bowl. So to simplify it, the higher the fuel level, the sooner it's going to come in with that Venturi vacuum, and the lower the fuel level, the later it's going to come in. We do this with Hollies, and I've gone over this before. It's very important to a carburetor. So after doing that, then I had pretty good mixture control on everything. And honestly, for a lawnmower carb, it was pretty lights out on the V8, at least for something that could run and rev. And, I have pretty good reason to believe that I can actually drive this thing. It's not going to have a lot of power, but I almost guarantee it I can putz it down the road and go up hills, and we're going to try and take it on the interstate. So a unit. That's called a dialed engine right there, folks. And I know you're digging this chain in here. Perfect for the aesthetic of the car. This car is so rusted out that engine twists so hard. If you see that big crack in my windshield, one day on a hard pole, it actually twisted the car so hard that it cracked the windshield. Here, we'll take a look under. Show you our Bluetooth torque box that isn't there. So, you know, she's a prime unit. We're sitting in our 1974 Maverick. It has a 302 and a 4-speed, and it's a rusty garbage can, but today it has a lawnmower carb under the hood as opposed to its typical 390 4-barrel. So should be pretty interesting. Today we're going to try and take the thing for a drive and see how it does going down the road. Now obviously this is way smaller than anything would have ever been on an automotive engine, so I expect it to be questionable at best. Figure we might as well try a cold start on this thing. Apparently our 390 still has gas in it. It reeks like gas in here. Now my leg's soaked with it. Oh boy, now my passenger seat's soaked with it. Okay, off to a good start. So we're gonna pull the choke out because it has no accelerator pump. We'll just see what we have. Push our choke in. A little bit of throttle. See, that's the annoying part of this whole thing. It runs really, really well. That's just stupid. All right, so before I fire this thing off and it gets really loud and obnoxious, we'll just take a look here under the hood. We have some 3D printed parts, you know, our adapter to our lawnmower carb and then our adapter to our air filter housing, which the whole thing is almost kind of frustrating because if you look at it, it almost looks good if you didn't know it was the stupidest thing you've ever seen in your life. But we've adapted a lawnmower throttle because, of course, it's a lawnmower carburetor. You have to use a lawnmower throttle. And that's hooked in here with the throttle cable on the car like normal. And it all works pretty good. We have our regulator hanging out back here with something I designed and lasered out to mount the regulator back behind a normal carburetor. And it worked good for this. We're regulated down to about 2.5 psi. From our last video, we saw that the carb can handle about 4.5 psi. So I made all the adjustments to the float height and everything to appropriately handle 2.5, and it's not flooding itself. And it runs pretty good. I'm going to go over a little bit of theory as to why this would or would not work when we actually try and drive this thing on the road. Alright, so getting back to our video here, one of the main concerns that I keep reading that people have, other than calling me an idiot for trying this, is that, you know, oh no, you're going to suck the fuel bowl dry. You know, potentially, but I highly doubt it, and here's why. And the first thing I want to mention about a carburetor is the fuel bowl is not a reservoir. You know, it's specifically designed and set up with the float height and the fuel height and everything because it has a direct relationship to the low pressure area of when the piston goes down and the fuel is drawn out of the main jet. You always want this the same because basically if this fuel level moves around, it's changing the relationship of the vacuum signal through the venturi it takes to draw fuel, and you know your fueling is going to come in at the wrong times, atomization is going to be off, so you always want this right in the same place, hard throttle, light throttle all the time. Now the main thing that's actually going to dictate if we can keep up with our fuel demand is going to be our fuel supply, which is our mechanical fuel pump, and we know that can run a 4-barrel Holley, so that's going to be fine. And then the other restrictor is our needle and seat. Now this was originally a gravity-fed carburetor, so you know the needle and seat on this compared to a Holley, they're actually extremely similar in size, so you know I don't think we're going to have an issue in that regard. Now the other thing that everyone keeps bringing up is that it's going to be way lean. I'm not really sure why a small carburetor correlates to something being way lean. And you know what, give me a second here, I'll draw this up and we'll explain why this isn't going to be the case. You know, potentially, but in my theory is that it's actually going to be rich, and I'll show you why. So here we have our mower carb, here's the carb body, here's the throttle blade, it's wide open at the moment, our float bowl, and our main jet, okay? So on a lawnmower carburetor, when it's at full throttle, the lawnmower is notably smaller than our big 302 V8, big, Windsor series. But anyway, so when the throttle's wide open, I assume that our vacuum is 0 inches of mercury. That is some bad handwriting, 0 inches HG. And so basically the relationship of the jet to the vacuum signal is designed for that lawnmower unit. Now with our big V8 at wide open throttle, I have a good feeling we're going to be somewhere, 8 to maybe 15 inches of mercury, wide open again. So that changes the relationship of the design of what the jet was originally for. And since our airflow, this is a naturally aspirated engine, atmospheric pressure is 14.5, 14.7 PSI, depending on where you are with the sea level and whatnot. In Iowa here, around 14.5 or so. So basically airflow is limited by the size of the carburetor itself, okay? We can only get so much in. But since this relationship is different, now we're pulling way more vacuum on the carb itself. Just a loose understanding of fluid dynamics, and you didn't have to go to the University of Space-Time Continuum to maybe figure this out, and I could be wrong, but what I think is going to happen is that vacuum signal on this jet is going to be way more aggressive, and it's actually going to go way rich, and we'll see here. I'll probably eat my words, but carburetor being a static metering device in a dynamic environment, and we're trying to do every load type scenario with one metering circuit, so it could get a little weird, but I bet you cruising down the road, I wouldn't be surprised if it tries to be pretty darn rich in this case. So that's kind of my theory behind that. Let me draw up another thing. I did some adjustments to my ignition timing specifically for this scenario, and it probably wouldn't work so well if I didn't do this. And so I'm going to try and really simplify it, and hopefully it makes a lot of sense for you. Okay, so I apologize in advance for my horrible drawing, but that's kind of what we're working with. It's a little disproportionate. Obviously the mower is notably smaller than the 4-barrel, but you get the idea. The lawnmower carb is small, the 4-barrel is big. So what I'm thinking the mower is going to want a lot of ignition timing. I'm almost sure it's going to want a lot more ignition timing than the 4-barrel, is just because it has less volume to work with. Now, why does that matter? Well, our cylinder, regardless of what metering source we're using, is the same size. So if we take this volume and move it over into here versus here, what was once, maybe a volume this big or so is now much smaller, and it's spread over the whole area. You got to think about this in a volumetric way. But what it's going to take is firing the ignition much sooner to fully propagate this cylinder charge at the right time. If you're firing your ignition late, you're leaving power on the table, and with the mower carb, we're going to want all we can get. And if you fire it too early, well, then you put holes in your piston, and that's bad. There's an optimum point in the cylinder stroke to fire the charge. And these two compared to one another, I almost guarantee you, since these particles are going to be farther apart, less volumetric fill on the cylinder, we're going to have to ignite that cylinder charge much sooner to burn that mixture at the right time. Now to make this relatable, just think of your vacuum advance on your distributor. It's adding timing at high vacuum scenarios. When are you at high vacuum scenarios? Well, when you're at very light throttle, not a lot of throttle. What have you done? You've essentially taken the cylinder charge, cut it in half, so your volume that you're getting in the cylinder is essentially less. And because of that, you need to fire your mixture sooner. And that's why when you roll into the throttle hard, and you're again getting more of this volume into the engine, then vacuum advance drops out. You pull timing in order to still fire that mixture at the right time, if that makes any sense. So, jumping over here, again, on this whole lean thing, 16:1, 14:1, 12:1, different ratios here. Again, it's a ratio of the air to fuel. Just because you're getting less air doesn't mean you're getting less fuel. It's proportional to the volume of air that you're getting. Now, since it's this little bit, essentially it's going to be like running at 25% throttle, so we're going to need more ignition timing. So anyway, that's kind of the long and short of it. Let's get back to our video, and I might be all wrong. We're going to find out really quick. I'm pretty interested. Alright, so a little more 3D print work here. I made a modified adapter to basically clear that big old ugly HEI distributor that's on this Ford engine. Ford loving to put the distributor in the front kind of causes some issues, and I didn't really want to clock the carburetor at a different angle because, I don't know, just aesthetically I didn't like it that way. So I kind of designed this bad boy up and it clears pretty good, printed out pretty good, you know, like everything with the fine tip and layer walls. It did take a while, but it turned out pretty decent. Now getting back to this rich scenario that I'm assuming that we're going to have when we're trying to go down the road, remember this carburetor doesn't have all the dynamic circuits that a normal automotive carburetor would have to handle the dynamic load scenarios. So I basically designed and programmed a little carb cheater that basically has a valve that I can programmatically control to add or pull air. So I can essentially on demand adjust the air fuel ratio by just allowing in more air or allowing in less air. So I made this all on open source software. Here is our app software here. It's all pretty easy to do. You know, I wish I would have found this stuff earlier. It was around when I was a kid, you know, 'cause it's the amount of things that you can just do with things like this in the world today and get your hands on for free, and it's easy and cheap, and you know, there's a lot of resources online to be able to do it. It's just wicked cool, and I think it's going to work out really good today. Get a little temp in it before we try and go down the road. Probably a one-way trip, I'd imagine. I'd be surprised if this does decent. But I mean, as far as sitting and idling, I mean, it's just annoying. It arguably runs pretty darn good. Busy today, but I think I'm about ready to take this thing for a drive. You see here we're idling at about 700 RPM, 18 inches of mercury, and we're sitting about 14.5 on the air fuel ratio. So this is my little trick that's going to make this whole thing work. Okay, let's just turn our auto tune off, close our valve. You heard the RPM dropped quite a bit. And now we're idling down around 11.5, so we'll turn that back on, idle and cruising. Heard the RPM pick back up. It's going to go to that 14.5 AFR. So basically I have the dynamic capability to handle different driving scenarios, whereas just a lawnmower carburetor by itself, you know, it really never could. So let's take this thing for a rip. Alright, the engine's up to temp. No time like the present, I figure. See how this goes. Clutch in, a little bit of throttle. Oh, and our block is holding us up. Here we go. So the first thing I got to handle is this really big hill. You know I gotta hammer it up the hill, right? Think we can spin the tires? I'm surely gonna try. Oh, that is so stupid. Second gear? I can hear my tuner whistling away, just making this all happen. This is ridiculous. Can we get third gear? The best part about this is extremely quiet compared to what this car normally is. It's just not getting any air volume. But it don't take much to go down the road. We pull up this hill. Here, let me flip the camera around and show you what I'm dealing with. Right up this hill, we're in third gear. At 2,000 RPM, I don't have a speedo, but this is about 55 mile an hour. I don't even know what to say. I thought this would be a lot worse. Cruising good. Let's grab fourth up this hill. Now we're really lugging it. Just does not care. Oh my goodness. I've never been so excited in my life for such little horsepower. I don't know if you can see that, but we're doing 65. And only using about a quarter throttle. We'll get off here. Not too bad. Staying at a nice 180 degrees. We're just keeping up with traffic like no problem. Cruising down the road at 1,600 RPM. Doing a pretty good job of maintaining good air-fuel ratio here. We're just cruising down the road with a lawnmower carburetor. It doesn't ice up with the hood shut, I imagine, because it's so hot. Oh boy, this is so absurd. I completely expected something to, you know, I don't know, go wrong. I wish I would have got a shot of it. I did like 70 on the interstate. I think it had more in it, but, you know, I just was like, better play it safe for now until we get some road time on it. There's 70. Definitely something you should never do, ever. But I guess if you use the right things and think about it the right way, it can be done. Here we are pulling into the gas station. Temp never overheated. Everything looks good. Does it run on? Shuts right down. What a minty unit. Not bad. That's a wrap, boys. So naturally, I know what you're thinking, that I faked this thing, and I never think about this stuff, you know, because just being legit. So I'm gonna get back on the interstate after our little gas station stop. Driving with my knee here, super safe. And we're gonna get on the interstate, we're gonna hit 70, and then we're gonna pull off and open the hood all in one shot, so you can see that I'm not pulling your leg here. Because I'll be honest with you guys, if I saw someone else do this, I wouldn't believe it either. Because, you know, like I've been saying through this whole project, this is kind of surprising me also. All right, so here we are getting on the interstate. We're doing 65, 66 or so. And now I'm gonna pull off here and we're gonna open the hood so you know I'm not pulling your leg. All right, some downshift action. Of course, we got people right behind us that are gonna think this old rattle trap automobiles piece of garbage, which it is. All right, here we go. Get it stopped. Oh, I just ran over a board with a nail in it. That might stop us in our tracks. There she is. There you have it, folks. Lawnmower carb on a V8. I wouldn't believe it if I didn't do it myself, honestly. All you folks that said I couldn't do it and that this would never work, you know, I originally made this thing as a joke, a wall hanger conversation piece, but then all you guys were so rude about it on the different Facebook groups that, well, here we are. I just had to do it. You can see, know a little bit about fluid dynamics. It can be pretty dangerous. A lot of folks have been asking about gas mileage and everything. Now, that's not the original reason I did this. Honestly, I did it for the absurdity, not necessarily the practicality, but ironically, it's turned out to be pretty darn practical. And so today we're going to hit the road and see just what type of fuel economy we can get. I have some theories that we'll go through when we're going down the road as to why I think this has the potential to do better. It's much more, there's much more to it than like, you know, oh, if you just put a block behind your throttle, it's the same difference. No, I don't think it is, but today we're going to find out. So with that, let's hit the road and just see what happens. We might end up on the side of the road. I don't know. Should be entertaining either way. You guys asked in the last video how I'm controlling air-fuel ratio on this carb, a carb being an otherwise static metering device, you know, and then you can see on my app that I have variable control based on engine feedback parameters that I can trim that air-fuel ratio. How am I doing this? And it's so simple, it'll actually make you mad. It's nothing more than a controlled vacuum leak. Since we know the lawnmower carb is going to try and be rich, you know, basically we can proportionally adjust our vacuum leak. We're tapped in right here to allow in more air based on a target deviation from what we're seeing in real time on the wideband versus what we want to be at. So, you know, if it's at 12 and we want to be at 14, it's going to lean it out until it's at 14, you know. So that's kind of the simplified version. It's also reading in vacuum on here. So, you know, based on load scenarios, it can trim the air-fuel ratio differently. Now, I've already moved on to a new design because honestly, I'm just kind of entertained by the whole thing. And then I got smart and was like, wait a second, I got a 3D printer. I don't have to machine this big, ugly valve in here. So, you know, we have our valve body all 3D printed. There's our Chevy idle air control valve. Again, you know, very simple. And now it's all contained in one small package. So that's for later. For now, this is working good. And we're going to hit the road and just see how much we can get out of this lawnmower carburetor with all this adaptive control. And, you know, fingers crossed, it's seeming to do much better than I thought it would. Now, the first thing I want to mention about this car is that, yeah, it's just so annoying how well that lawnmower carb fires up in here. But I want to mention that this car is in no means set up as an ideal scenario for fuel economy. I mean, I did my alignment with a string, okay? So, you know, that's pretty sub-ideal for fuel economy in and of itself. Not to mention, big carbureted V8. It's a 4-speed without an overdrive, you know. It's about as aerodynamic as a brick. And so, you know, I don't know. We'll just see what it does. Drives so well, though. Just comes right off a stop, no problem. Let's get down the road here and get to the interstate. And we'll hop on, hit the road, and just see what type of economy we can eke out of this thing. I forgot the fabled on-ramp test here. miles an hour-ish, you know, because that's kind of like realistic driving. And so we'll just see how we do. 70. Not too bad for a lawnmower car. Man, I'm telling you, we're just cruising. 71. Let's toe into a little bit. 72, 74, 75. You know, I'm probably at like a quarter throttle on this thing, and it's just propelling the car right along, leaving other people in the dust. So here's a shot of our tuner making this all happen at least as efficiently as possible. We're at 14 to 1 or so, 17, 18 inches of mercury going down the road. She's doing a pretty good job. Now we'll do the thing here everyone wanted me to do. The last video. Alright, so we've turned our adjustment off. And now we're somewhere around 12. If I toe into it harder, it just gets a lot richer. So we're going to turn that back on. We're kind of skewing our fuel economy test at this point in the wrong direction. It's worth mentioning I'm not even trying to lean burn this thing or anything. We're just targeting around stoichiometric. We don't really care other than that, so it's pretty normal for what a typical car would be doing going down the road. So anyway, you can see it still works even with the tuner off. It's just getting richer and richer and richer the harder I get into the throttle to a point. So without the tuner, you know, it's probably much less efficient. But other than that, I mean, the engine's running good, everything's clean, it's smooth, temp is staying down where it normally is, you know, other than the whole car being notably quieter, because, you know, I can tell we're using less fuel volume. It's essentially very drivable, and honestly, I don't even notice a difference at these speeds and this RPM range. It's pretty minty. I don't know if you can see that, because it's a nice sunny day for once, but our fuel gauge hasn't even moved. Oh, this is nice. This guy just straight up cut me off. Why don't we just walk around him? Really skewing our fuel economy test at this point, but totally worth it just to prove a point. Oh yeah, we're doing like probably 75, 80 right now. Somewhere in there, between 75 and 80. Oh boy. It's about the time I realized I didn't bring any tools, and I didn't bring a backup carburetor or anything. So I really hope it holds together. I assume it will. I've been driving it for about a week without any issues, but you know, it's like the cardinal sin of automotive. If you don't have tools or any backup, anything, that's the time you're gonna break down. If you have tools, you never break down. So cross our fingers and hope fortune is with us today. This whole thing's going so well, I'm like borderline kind of bored. It's just like driving a normal car to work. Alright, so I got a long drive ahead of me. Why don't we just jump into the science as to why I believe this will probably get good gas mileage, and honestly, why it's looking like it is actually getting pretty good gas mileage. It's not what you would think. Now, some theories as to why this Mower carb on a big V8 is getting better gas mileage. And the biggest argument people say about this whole scenario is that basically the lawnmower carb is the same as zip tying a block to the back of your gas pedal. You're just giving it more throttle. And I'm going to have to disagree with you yet again. There's a lot more to this scenario than that. Now, it is true that it takes X horsepower, you know, to go X mile per hour. And it takes X fuel to get to that horsepower that we need. But here's the kicker to this whole thing. Fuel doesn't burn in a liquid state, okay? Fuel actually burns in a gas state. And what's happening with this little tiny carburetor with its little tiny venturi and its exponentially better vacuum signal is that this fuel is breaking up like crazy and just atomizing like none other. And so basically what it's doing is any fuel that goes through the engine in the liquid state is just wasted. You know, that's where you lose a lot of your efficiency with a combustion engine. But in this case, we're atomizing this fuel so well that we're getting the same power content out of a less amount of fuel. It's taking less fuel to get that same gas state volume that we need to make the horsepower. Now, to make this even better, and mildly unintentionally, I cut a hard 90 on that intake, and you can see on the air filter side, you know, again, there are 2 hard 90s going inside. What is this doing? And this is an old trick, honestly. You see a lot of folks do this. It creates a lot of turbulence through this scenario, especially this 90. Is it great for, you know, high flow, max performance stuff? No. But as far as atomizing the fuel content, it's going to work like none other. So that's kind of my working theory to this whole thing. We've essentially accidentally made something similar to a vapor carburetor, although in this scenario it's pretty responsive, where a vapor carburetor kind of has trouble keeping up with the load. So I'm real curious today. This is kind of my background thought as to why I think this is getting better fuel economy, and I don't know, we'll see today what we get. I know it's better, it's just a question of how much better it is at this point. We're about to our destination here, and our fuel has like never moved this whole time. That is really strange. I wouldn't be surprised if the fuel gauge is broken or something. This is just unnatural. All right, we made it. Here we are getting off the interstate, problem-free. Something else, dude. Oh, and heavy traffic at 5 o'clock. My favorite. I guess I should be thankful this is seemingly so practical. Return to an idle, perfect. Right off a stop like nothing. It's like a normal driving car. Normal driving car that's 1,000,000 degrees inside. Alright, and finally, the gas station, and the moment I've all been waiting for. See what type of fuel economy this thing got. Not that I care, it's already a pretty solid victory in my book. Just driving a lawnmower carburetor. Okay, here we go. Everyone's favorite gas station. Come and go. That's it. Let's see what we did. All right, so here we go. Dink. Now we'll just see what happens. Maybe. Is that it? I have gas running out of my filler. That can't be it. Yeah, that is all she wrote. And just to show you this is no BS, I mean, obviously you're gonna believe me with this type of fuel economy. I'm almost speechless. My hands are like shaking. It's so strange. There she is sitting in there. Our little lawnmower carb. I shut the valve off when I'm parked just so the fuel doesn't boil in the line and boil into the engine. Hasn't been an issue, but it's just one of those things. But wow. All right, I've had to take a second to calm down as my hands are shaking so bad I can hardly hold the phone. But we went from the Marshalltown BP to the Ames Come and Go here. Now granted, it's all mostly highway interstate driving, but just take a look at this. 37 miles. So, if I can remember where anything is on my phone. So if we take 37 miles divided by, we used, I'm just gonna round up, it was 0.8 something, 0.9. We're getting like 41 miles to the gallon in this car right now. I just don't even believe it. And I, you know, kind of got on it a few times and I flicked the gas pump because I super didn't believe it. But I mean, it makes sense. The fuel gauge never moved the whole time we were driving down the road. See here, we'll flip. Well, obviously I filled up now, duh. But that is ridiculous. All right, well that's it. We're back home safe and sound. It's all in one piece. I've logged probably 250 miles or so on it now. That was 37 miles one way and 37 miles back. So I'm not good at math, but you know, that's a few miles on it, not a ton, but you know, it's been holding up good so far. No issues with it, no warpage. It handles fuel and engine heat just fine. And our little cherry on the top that probably made this thing actually as efficient as it is and kept our air fuel ratio where we wanted it to be. You know, I knew it would work out pretty good, and I'm super curious how it'll work out on a normal 4-barrel. You know, as far as having dynamic control of a static metering carb, you know, I don't know, you know, maybe that'll play well. It sure worked way better on this lawnmower carburetor thing than I ever thought it would. I'm just kind of blown away with the whole deal, you know. What a wild ride. This started out as something that I didn't even do to put on YouTube, right? I made this as an April Fool's joke, this CAD rendering of this intake with this carb to post on some different Facebook groups, and then folks just were really rude about it, and so that's how it ended up on the car, you know, and I did it for absurdity, not necessarily practicality, and then it was just surprisingly practical, and then, you know, it devolved into this thing where we made the carb tuner, and, you know, then we just laid down some stupid miles per gallon in this V8 car, and it's exceptionally drivable for what it is. So, you know, it's just something else. This whole series was actually going to be about carb sizing, where everyone way over carbs their engines, and that's what's given carbs such a bad name. There's CFM calculators online for your engine size and the RPM that, you know, the max RPM you're probably going to take your car to on a regular basis, and I do recommend you check those out. I'll leave a link below, you know, all the TV shows and everything showing big dyno numbers. Yes, you can make that with a big carb, but all your drivability, your fuel economy down low, where you use your car, like what are you doing with your car? Like me, you're probably driving your car on the road. This 390 CFM pulls exceptionally hard to 5,500 RPM. And, you know, on the street, that's all you need. And it lays down 26 miles to the gallon doing it in this old ratty piece of garbage, you know, nothing like the lawnmower car, but, you know, that's like other dimensional things going on right there right now. So I still don't even know exactly what to think about that or what to do with that info. But, you know, just really don't read into all the TV show stuff. Properly size your carb, and I guarantee you'll be exceptionally happy with a carburetor. They work off vacuum. If you have good vacuum signal, they're going to do their job very well. So moving forward, you know, this carb cheater, I guess we're going to call it now that I got on this car, I'm going to reconfigure it so it works with a 4-barrel, and we're just going to see what we can do with a 4-barrel carburetor that's an otherwise static metering device, you know, giving it dynamic capability, and see what it does with that, because that thing worked pretty good there. I don't know why it wouldn't work on one of these guys. So anyway, I appreciate you guys coming along with me for it, and boy, I tell you, it was a lot of fun.